We're back, joined by the inimitable Mark Steyn. He is currently riding the crest of a new, and I'm quite certain, extraordinary, best-selling book promotion tour. It is featuring the book that he published after America Alone, and it is entitled After America. And Mark, I confess I've only had the briefest of opportunities to scan it since it came out yesterday, but I heard you speak at length and with your usual aplomb at the Western Conservative Summit 2 weeks ago, so I have a flavor of it. Share with the audience, if you would please, what is the essence of this gloomy prognosis and what we can do about apparent decline of the West and the United States as well.
Yeah, I think the book's position is really that we're past decline. We've been in decline for some time, and we're now accelerating toward fall. So if we want to do something about it, this isn't something we can sit around discussing. We can't form a commission. We can't form a committee and wait for it to come up with proposal. Yeah, we can't form a super committee and wait for it to report and plan to raise the age of Medicare eligibility from 65 to 67 by the year 2075. It's happening now. We got to fix it by the middle of this decade, or we are in, I believe, for a half-millennium civilizational shift in which 2 centuries of Anglophone dominance by Britain and America, and before that, European dominance by Italy and the Portuguese, whom we forget were once a great power. We're going to be heading into a world that will be dominated by a totalitarian state such as China, by a nuclear caliphate represented by Iran and Saudi Arabia, and by kleptocrat opportunists like the gangsters in the Kremlin. We are not going to enjoy that world.
Yeah. You described at the summit, as I say, recently, a easy handoff from the former world superpower, Great Britain, to its Anglophone progeny, namely the United States. What is the prospect, as you see it, Mark Steyn, of a handoff to this array of unsavory sorts? I mean, how does that take place, and how bumpy a ride does it actually prove to be?
Yeah, I make the point, which is a very simple one, with that the last transfer of power from one dominant nation to another was so smooth we didn't even notice it. In part because Britain was like a failing company, it was like a failing old once successful family firm that can't stay in business, so looks for the most suitable buyer out there to preserve its brand in the years ahead. And when Pax Britannica faded, they looked to Washington. Obviously, there were differences, and obviously there is a segment of the British establishment that chafes at the idea of having to pack it in and hand over power to Washington. But basically, that's about as compatible a transfer of power as you can get. And you see it in the practical sense with Canadian officers in Cheyenne Mountain, at Wyoming, at NORAD. You see it in the U.S. military base in the British Indian Ocean Territory. You see it in the ANZUS alliance between Australia and the United States. Washington picked up London's slack and life went on. And anyone who thinks that when the dominant power, Washington, cedes that role to Beijing, it's going to be like that, has got to be out of their mind. By 2016, according to the IMF, the leading economic superpower will be a totalitarian state with a peasant population and no market economy, no human rights. The idea that life goes on is simply preposterous.
Yeah. Mark Steyn is our guest, author of the brand new and incipient best-selling book, After America. Get ready for Armageddon. Bracing title, if ever there were one. Mark, to what extent is what has been going on here, the decline that we've been going through, as you say, a function of the Obama administration's stewardship, its statist attitudes, its multiculturalism, its leading from behind, its embrace of the Muslim Brotherhood, or is this really just further impetus behind trends that have been underway for some time on the responsibility of both parties?
Well, I think the trends have been there, present since the 1960s, really, since the creation of unsustainable entitlements. And in a broader sense, I think in a geopolitical sense, they're a hangover from 1950, when America was the last man standing in the developed world. I mean, literally, whichever side you're on in the Second World War, every other industrial nation had its factories and its plants reduced to rubble, bombed to smithereens. And so the United States had more money than anybody else. It was in a unique position of power. And even as the German economy recovered, and in Asia, the Koreans got with the capitalist program, and then in more recent times, China wanted a piece of the action, America still had geopolitically a kind of 1950 attitude that it wasn't as other nation states, but it was somehow so big that it could afford to spend on a scale beyond all other nation states. And I think all that the Obama administration did was really make this explicit, this delusion explicit, and they cranked domestic spending really up to they floored it and made what had been a kind of semi-submerged implicit trend a whoa, we're heading for the cliff at Obamacrest speed, and in a sense it was impossible to dodge the truth. But I think the difference is that he wants it. I think America stumbled into a kind of semi-European future accidentally. I think the difference is Obama and the Democrats really want a big welfare dependency swamp of the kind that Greece and Portugal and other places, and it is simply not possible for America to be a large Portugal.
Yeah, that's really the troubling point of all of this, is that our options are not very good at this point. But Mark, give us a sense of what your recommendation is be done by the United States to avoid the complete fall and reverse the decline.
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize that certain things we've been fetishizing over recent years are a delusion. For example, globalization. I'm a great believer in free trade. I think it's great if some guy on the other side of the world makes a product that I can buy. I think I should have the right to buy it without governments at either end interceding. But what we have a situation here is where we've deformed trade, and we're actually funneling money from a genuine market into a totalitarian statist regime. China doesn't have a market. A guy in Idaho can't make anything to sell to some upcountry guy in the Chinese hinterland. So we have to get back to free trade, and not with the delusion of globalization, which is that China and India and everyone on the planet can become rich selling stuff that the American shopping mall customer buys on credit, because there simply isn't enough money in the world to fund that structure. Secondly, I think we have to recognize that the entitlements are an existential threat. We will retreat from global power as surely as the Europeans did, simply because you can have a Scandinavian-sized domestic state, or you can have a military of global reach, but you can't have both. And so, as we already see in Washington, the intention is to, Medicare's difficult, so let's cut some of these unpleasant foreign wars we got mixed up in. That's what Democrats, that's what liberals say to me all the time. I think it's true we can do a lot of things more smartly there. Sudan, which is often in the news these days, the least worst period in Sudanese history was when it was run by about 200 British civil servants in the three-quarters of a century until 1956. 200 British civil servants ran that. 200 civil servants isn't even enough to staff a branch office of the Federal Department of Community Organizer grant applications these days in Washington. So I think there is something to be said at the geopolitical level for learning to do more with less. What is the real issue here is that Americans have to understand that the peace and prosperity they've enjoyed since 1950 is not as permanent a feature of life as the earth and sky, but is the product of very particular conditions. And when those conditions are gone, then we will be in a very dark place. And it is wicked and immoral for strutting buffoons in Washington to posture as somehow compassionate and caring when all they're doing is spending money that is yet to be earned by generations yet to be born. Our grandchildren will dig up our bones and toss them on a huge bonfire for the hellhole we have left them, unless we correct that kind of thinking.
Your message couldn't be more clear or timely were needed. Mark Steyn, thank you so much for finding some time for us here at Secure Freedom Radio. Good luck with the book, and please come back to us soon. God bless.
Always a pleasure, Frank.
Next up.